Well, praise the Lord, saints and friends. This is Elder Adrian Heyman on another session in a series on the book of Genesis, or the book of beginnings. Now, those of you who are scientists, I understand that there's many differences between what's happened in the 7 creative days versus what it says in science. I understand that because you have to make your choice. However, I would want you to see how close the creation narrative goes to not necessarily the time frame, but the order in which things are created. And even with the time where it says light was created before the sun came, or the moon came, it is noted that in the Big Bang theory, that for it wasn't just a few moments, but essentially in the period, maybe about the first 100,000 years that they said after the Big Bang, when the universe was still expanding wildly, it was so much energy still that everything was light. It was so hot that essentially matter was probably at some of its highest energies ever. So even that sort of has a throwback to what it says in Genesis. And you also have to understand this too. This is talking during a period which really no one knew the science. No one understood the concept of quasars and light years and things that particular nature. They didn't even know about dinosaurs and so on. They just knew what they saw and they tried to comment on it. And for God to present them science the way that it was or is, would have completely blown their minds. All you got to do is read Revelation and see how the things that are about to take place that can be explained through our technology, how those things, how they're expressed by the Apostle John. So we have to understand not the capacity, but essentially just how much did ancient people know of their surroundings. So just wanted to talk a little bit about that before I go into our lesson for today. And our lesson for today deals with essentially the 5th day and the creations that happened on the 5th day, beginning with verse number 20. And it says, "And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that have life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the 5th day." So after everything that's been taking place, the gathering of the land into certain areas, the gathering of the seas into other areas, the creation of the atmosphere, actually, it is interesting that at that particular time, God created aquatic life as well as a fowl that would fly in the skies. Now, there is also a reason behind this as well. Now, remember that plant life was already created. And so if the animals were created before the plant life, then they would have a horrible time trying to find food because there was no food. Now, according to science, according to what many paleontologists and people that study the past, many of them feel essentially that the seas brought forth the first life, which is kind of what it says here, that the seas brought forth the first life. First was plankton, and then it essentially changed from single-celled creatures to multi-celled, and then it got bigger with that. So the next great invasion was of the land, but it wasn't happened yet. And the Bible seems to follow that. That essentially, it shows all the creatures of the seas and how they grew and everything else. And understand also that in many cases, the sea was really the main source of food, as well as plant life. So you got the sea life and you have plant life that comes first. So again, even without opening up a book of ancient history and a book of ancient geology, that God still is able to bring forth things that at least make some sense. Because in most narratives of creation, among those that, like Egyptian gods or the Greek gods or so on, it was mainly kind of haphazard, or was all done at once. But there seems to be a plan with God. And again, we have to also understand this too, that God's focus is on the earth because he wrote the Bible for the inhabitants of earth. I could care less who happens to inhabit certain planets in the Milky Way or in the Andromeda Galaxy or wherever they may happen to be, where people find exoplanets. That's good. Find the exoplanets. That has no bearing on what the Lord has done for us here on this planet. And so that's why I continue to praise and worship God. And even though people want to, and let me say this about too. People say, well, what about the dinosaurs? What about the dinosaurs? Well, what about the dinosaurs? I'm not saying that they did or didn't exist. Maybe they existed before the flood. Don't know. Or maybe it's part of the gap theory that many ascribe to, that between Genesis 1 and 1 and Genesis 1 and 2, there was actually a gap that the earth became void because of some catastrophe. And it's possible that the dinosaurs lived during that time and died during that time. I have no idea. I will ask God when I get up there. But as far as people understanding the world around them, the ancient, this is about as advanced as they could get. That God created, it says, great whales and other creatures as well. Think about it. The giant squid, the great white shark, and all the various things that people haven't even discovered. Even now in the 21st century, people are still discovering new species of ocean life. Because it wasn't meant for man to name everything in the ocean. Didn't say man would name everything in the ocean. There could be some things that God created that essentially would just completely blow our minds. And there are some. If you look at the denizens of the deepest, darkest trenches, how can things live without light? But there are animals that live all the way down there. There are organisms that live near volcanic vents that vent up in the water that provide nutrients. But they have to go without light. So they have to be able to understand how to navigate. Boy, the Lord is so wonderful in what he does. And not only that, the oceans provide much of the basic nutrients for other animals, both in the sea and in the air, as well as those on the land. The plankton that is grown, how can they be the food of the giant blue whale, which is at this point the largest creature in modern times. Some can grow to over 100 feet long. Huge creatures that can swim as easy as anything else. But then also, the Lord created, at this point in time, the birds as well. Some that may actually live upon the sea, some that may go inland. But now, since they're plants, the birds can live off the seeds. The birds can live off the leaves and other things that they may need for their nutrients. And of course, those that are predator birds can feed off of the birds that are vegetarian, so to speak. But in any case, the Lord knew what he was doing. It wasn't haphazard. Everything was according to plan. And there may be some differences between the narrative from God's view and the narratives from our geologists in terms of their view as to how life was created, or biologists. But it generally follows that you need light, you need air, and for the animals, you need oxygen. So therefore, the plants were there to give off extra oxygen so that when the birds came on, and finally the animals would do so, they'll have enough oxygen. And the people of this time, when Moses gave out this book, they didn't understand all this. But we, looking back, can understand this and thank God for his wisdom in creating the earth and all there is therein in a particular order. Now, as I said before, the creative day may be 1 24-hour day. That's definitely not impossible for God. It's impossible for us to fathom, yes, but not impossible for God. Or it may be a creative day, where the day is stretched out over decades, centuries, millennia, even millions of years. I don't know. Again, these are things I will ask God. But I do know this, that whatever God created, it was good. As it said, God saw that it was good. Which lets you know that everything, even the cycles that happen in nature, we know now about the oxygen-nitrogen cycle. The oxygen-carbon dioxide cycle. Plants give off oxygen. The animals breathe it. The animals give off carbon dioxide. And the plants breathe that. Talk about how animals essentially, how they progressively, as they get bigger and stronger, they're more predatory. But even they have to come back to the earth. And the nutrients that they got out of the smaller animals, which the animals in turn got their nutrients off of the leaves and the grass and the trees. But those nutrients end up decomposing and falling back into the earth to start all over again. The animals that are here right now are eating things that have probably been recycled for thousands of years. Of course, with science, for millions of years, and they would not disagree with that. Who was to create that cycle? Who was to create that the rivers would go to the oceans? Oceans would then be the depository of all the waters. But they, in turn, would give up their water through evaporation and cause clouds to be formed in the sky and the weather to be moving from place to place to place to rain or snow on a particular place, and the whole cycle begins again with the streams through the rivers and so on. That tells you that this is a mighty God that we serve. And he didn't do this haphazardly. It was according to his plan. Then he said he blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas and let fowl multiply in the earth. It was probable that the vast numbers of creatures that we see now weren't there at the beginning. But through years and years and decades and centuries and millennia and so on and so on and so on of them bearing and of course when they were assured of having enough offspring to offset whatever was dying, then you could see how things begin to grow and spread. In other words, look at the ocean. Look at what's in it. The sea anemones, the starfish, the oysters, the crabs, the swordfish, the tuna, the dolphin, the killer whale, the sharks and the rays, the big giant whales, and the small little plankton, the algae, the seaweed, the coral. All these things came out of the mouth of God. If we look to the skies, the sparrows, the chickadees, the pigeons, the eagles, the hawks, the vultures, the owls, the robin, the sparrows, the gulls, the seagulls, the albatross, and all these things that have been created. Now, some of these things have been wiped out by man's intrusion, but God created them. And he created them for a special purpose and put them in specific ecosystems. They ended up being able to coexist with others in their same area. How the Arctic tern will not compete for food with the bald eagle, and the whales will not compete for food with the sharks. That they are designated for various depths at various temperatures. And I'm not even thinking about the octopus and the squid and all those creatures that you say, boy, they look weird. But God made them all. And these are the things that we have to praise God for. That he had the mind and the creativity to create all of these things. That every single organism has a purpose. And when I get to it, you'll see. Even the roach and the mouse and the mosquito, even though as pests as they may be, I go over them when God starts creating the animals. But they all have a purpose, a grand purpose. I'm not saying don't eliminate or don't fumigate because you see roaches. I mean, yeah, get them. You don't want any mosquitoes spreading malaria and ticks causing Lyme disease. You don't want that happening. But at the same time, these animals will survive because they have remarkable ways of making sure that they have enough descendants to ensure their existence upon the planet Earth. And that's amazing in itself. But God begins to create life that moves on its own, that goes from place to place. He begins in the seas and then in the air. He tells them to multiply, to fill the place. And God knows how much the oceans could take in terms of accommodating these animals. And God knows how much that the birds can take without decimating plants and forests and so on. God knows. He already understands. The ones who don't know is man. But God bless you and may he keep you. Hopefully these things are interesting for you. I know this is the beginning, but we should study beginnings. Not just to see where things came from, but to see how Moses taught the Israelites. Remember, this is the first book of the 5 books of Moses, which he undoubtedly taught to the Israelites. So they knew their history. They began to wonder, where did everything come from? Where did everything go? Well, they could have heard from the Egyptians, and because they were slaves there, they could have heard in the Canaanites and how it went there, or they stayed in the land of Ur and saw how their gods created life there. But Moses gave them what came from God. And in many instances, happens to coincide, not with what we think, but with what science thinks. That's the amazing thing. Again, I'm not saying it corresponds completely. It does not. Yes, there are some differences. But my amazement is in how many ways they're the same. May God bless you. May he keep you. May he look after you. And may he instill in you a spirit of wonder to look at his nature, to look at God's creation. Because if you look at it, it will cause you to praise God for his wisdom, for his creativity, for his kindness, for his preparedness. He's good. The Lord is good. God bless you. Take care of yourselves. Love you, saints. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.